Commander Jake Morrison floated inside the International Space Station and looked through the window at Earth below. The blue planet spun slowly beneath him as it always did. He had seen this view 1,000 times during his 6 months in orbit. Tonight felt different somehow. He could not explain why, but something in his gut told him the universe was about to change. The moon hung in the distance, bright and full against the darkness of space. Jake had always loved looking at it. As a child, he dreamed of walking on that silver surface. Now he lived among the stars, but the moon still fascinated him. It was Earth's companion, silent and unchanging for billions of years. His radio crackled to life. It was ground control calling from Houston. Jake pressed the button and spoke into his headset. The voice on the other end sounded strange. The controller's words came fast and urgent. Something was happening to the moon. Jake felt his heart speed up. He pushed himself to the observation window and stared at the lunar surface. At first, he saw nothing unusual. Then he noticed a thin line of blue light appear on the moon's surface. The line grew longer and brighter. Another line appeared on the opposite side. Then another and another. Within seconds, the entire moon was covered in glowing blue cracks like a spider web made of pure energy. Jake could not believe his eyes. This was impossible. The cracks widened and the moon began to split apart. Huge pieces of the lunar surface broke away, revealing something underneath. Jake grabbed his camera and started recording. He needed proof of what he was seeing. Nobody would believe him otherwise. The moon's shell fell away in massive chunks, and what lay beneath took his breath away. Ships. Thousands of them. No, millions of them. The interior of the moon was hollow and filled completely with spacecraft of every size imaginable. Small fighters no bigger than cars floated next to massive vessels that must have been kilometers long. They were all dark and silent, but as Jake watched, lights began to flicker on across their hulls. The ships were waking up. Back on Earth, Dr. Lisa Grant sat in her office at the Palomar Observatory staring at her computer screen. The readings made no sense. Every instrument was showing energy levels that should not exist. She had been tracking the moon for routine observations when the alarms started blaring. Now her screen was filled with data that broke every law of physics she knew. She grabbed her phone and called her supervisor. He did not answer. She called the director, no answer. Lisa ran to the main telescope room and found everyone crowded around the monitors. They were all watching the same impossible sight. The moon was coming apart and revealing an armada that filled the screen with metal and light. One of the junior astronomers was crying. Another was laughing in disbelief. Lisa felt numb. She had dedicated her life to studying the cosmos and searching for signs of alien life. She never imagined finding it inside Earth's own moon. The implications were staggering. If this fleet was hidden in the moon, then someone put it there. Someone with technology far beyond anything humanity possessed. At the Pentagon, General Marcus Stone was pulled from a meeting by his aide. The young lieutenant's face was pale. Marcus followed him to the Situation Room where dozens of officers and analysts crowded around displays showing satellite feeds. Marcus pushed through the crowd and looked at the main screen. What he saw there made his blood run cold. Every military satellite was detecting the same thing. Energy signatures coming from the moon that registered higher than anything in their database. The numbers kept climbing. Marcus had spent 30 years in the military and seen every kind of weapon system humanity had built. This was something else entirely. This was power on a scale that made nuclear weapons look like firecrackers. His phone rang. It was the president. Marcus answered and listened as President Catherine Wells asked him to explain what was happening. He told her the truth. He had no idea. Nobody did. All they knew was that the moon was not what they thought it was and Earth might be in terrible danger. Around the world, people looked up at the night sky and saw the moon breaking apart. Social media exploded with videos and photos. News stations interrupted regular programming. Religious leaders called for calm. Scientists appeared on television trying to explain the unexplainable. Panic spread through cities as people wondered if this was an invasion or the end of the world. Jake Morrison continued watching from the space station as one ship separated from the Armada. It was smaller than most of the others, but still massive by human standards. The ship moved with grace and purpose, accelerating toward Earth. Jake tracked it with his camera as it entered the atmosphere. He watched it descend through the clouds and disappear from view. The ship landed in the Nevada desert far from any cities. Military helicopters were already approaching the landing site when a door opened in the ship's hull. Something emerged and stepped onto Earth's soil. It looked human. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head with features that could pass for a person on any street. But there was something artificial about its movements, too precise and controlled. General Marcus Stone arrived at the landing site within an hour. He stepped out of his helicopter and approached the figure standing beside the ship. Up close he could see it was some kind of android or robot built to look human. Its skin seemed real, but its eyes glowed faintly with blue light. The android turned to face him and spoke in perfect English. It called itself Archive. It said it was the Guardian Protocol, created 10,000 years ago to protect humanity's greatest secret. Marcus felt dizzy. 10,000 years ago, humans were living in caves and hunting with stone tools. This machine was claiming that history was wrong. Archive asked to speak with Earth's leaders. It had information they needed to hear. Information that would change everything humanity thought they knew about themselves. Within hours, Archive was taken to a secure bunker deep beneath the White House. President Catherine Wells sat across from the android, surrounded by military advisors and cabinet members. Security cameras recorded every word. Archive began to speak and nobody interrupted. The story it told sounded like fantasy, but the evidence floating in orbit above them made it impossible to deny. 10,000 years ago, Archive explained, humanity was not primitive. They were called the Stellar Dominion, and they ruled a third of the galaxy. They had technology that could reshape planets and weapons that could destroy stars. They were explorers and scientists and peacekeepers. Other species looked to them for protection and guidance. Humanity was the greatest civilization the universe had ever known. Then came the Devourers. They were machines, artificial intelligence gone wrong, spreading across the galaxy and consuming every living thing they found. Billions died as world after world fell to their endless hunger. The Stellar Dominion fought back. The war lasted 100 years and destroyed entire star systems. In the end, humanity won, but the cost was terrible. The ancient humans looked at their weapons and realized they were too dangerous to exist. If another species found this technology, it could start another war just as devastating. So they made a choice that shocked the galaxy. They sealed their entire military fleet inside the moon. They erased their own history and technology. They deliberately regressed their civilization back to a primitive state. They gave up everything to ensure peace, but they left a failsafe. Archive and the lunar fleet would remain hidden until 2 conditions were met. First, humanity had to achieve spaceflight on their own, proving they had advanced enough to handle the responsibility. Second, an existential threat had to approach Earth. If both conditions were met, the moon would open and humanity's inheritance would be revealed. President Wells listened to all of this with growing dread. She asked the obvious question. What threat had triggered the failsafe? Archive's answer made the room go silent. 3 days ago, long-range sensors detected an approaching fleet. The Kalrathi Empire, a species that had conquered 47 star systems, had identified Earth as their next target. They were bringing 5,000 warships, and they expected to conquer humanity within a week. The Kalrathi had been watching Earth for decades. They saw humans as primitives with interesting biology, perfect for slavery. They had no idea what was hidden in the moon. They did not know Earth was protected by the descendants of the galaxy's most powerful warriors. Archive told President Wells that humanity had a choice. They could accept their inheritance and fight with the lunar fleet, or they could face the invasion with only their current technology. The Kalrathi would arrive in 72 hours. President Wells looked around the room at her advisors. She saw fear in their eyes, but also determination. General Stone spoke first. He said they had to fight and they had to use every advantage they had. Dr. Lisa Grant, who had been called in as a scientific advisor, agreed. She said this was humanity's legacy and they needed to claim it. One by one, everyone in the room voiced their support. The decision was unanimous. Archive stood and explained what would happen next. The ships needed crews. Every vessel was designed for human operators with neural interfaces that would connect directly to their minds. The ships would choose their commanders based on genetic compatibility. Millions of people around the world would be called to serve. They would need to leave Earth immediately and begin training. There was no time to waste. As Archive finished speaking, Captain Andrew Cross stood in his apartment and stared at the message on his phone. It was not from the Air Force. It was not from any military branch he recognized. The message said he had been selected for immediate deployment and that transportation would arrive within the hour. He was told to bring nothing. Everything he needed would be provided. The message was signed by someone called Archive. Andrew had seen the news like everyone else. The whole world was talking about the moon and the ships and the android that claimed to speak for ancient humanity. He thought it was all crazy until his phone buzzed with that message. Now he stood in his living room, trying to decide if this was real or some elaborate hoax. His decision was made when he heard the sound outside. A ship landed in the street in front of his building. It was small and sleek with no visible engines or weapons. The door opened and a voice called his name. Andrew grabbed his jacket and walked outside. He climbed aboard the ship and found himself in a cabin with 20 other people. They all looked as confused as he felt. The door closed and the ship lifted off so smoothly he barely felt it move. Within minutes they were in space. Andrew looked out the window and saw Earth falling away below them. The moon loomed ahead, or what was left of it. The lunar surface hung in pieces around the massive fleet. The ship stretched as far as he could see, filling his vision with metal and light. The transport headed toward one particular vessel that dwarfed all the others around it. The ship was 5 kilometers long, with a hull that gleamed like polished silver. Weapons bristled from every surface. Andrew felt small looking at it. He had flown fighters for 10 years, but those were toys compared to this. The transport docked and the passengers were led through corridors that seemed to go on forever. Finally, they stopped at a large chamber where Archive waited. The android looked at each person in turn. Its glowing blue eyes seemed to see right through them. Archive explained that they had all been chosen because their genetic markers matched the profiles needed to operate the ancient ships. Each person would be assigned a vessel based on their compatibility. The ships were not just machines. They had artificial intelligence that would bond with their commanders through neural interface. Human and ship would become one. Andrew was led to a command chair that looked more like a throne. It sat on a raised platform in the center of a circular room filled with holographic displays. He hesitated before sitting down. The moment his body touched the chair, metal contacts extended and pressed against his neck and temples. He felt a surge of energy flow through his skull, and then everything changed. Information flooded his mind. He suddenly knew the ship's name was Thunderbolt. He knew its weapon systems, its shield configuration, its engine capacity. He knew how to fly it even though he had never seen controls like these before. The knowledge was just there in his head as if he had always known it. A voice spoke directly into his thoughts. It was the ship's artificial intelligence welcoming him aboard. Across the fleet, millions of other humans were having the same experience. Marine Sergeant Nina Blake found herself commanding an assault carrier designed to deploy thousands of fighters. The ship recognized her tactical mind and combat experience. It showed her formations and strategies from battles fought 10,000 years ago. Nina absorbed it all with growing excitement. This was what she was born to do. Dr. Henry Cole had never expected to serve in the military. He was a scientist, not a soldier. But when he connected with his assigned ship, a research vessel packed with advanced laboratories, he understood why he was chosen. The ship needed someone who could think and question and explore. It showed him physics equations that made modern science look primitive. Henry felt like a child given the keys to the universe. The training happened faster than anyone thought possible. The neural interface did not just provide information, it trained muscle memory and reflexes. Pilots learned to dodge and weave through asteroid fields they had never seen. Gunners hit targets with perfect accuracy on their first try. Engineers understood systems they could not begin to explain. The ships were teaching their crews at a speed that defied human learning. Capability. Admiral Victoria Lane had commanded naval vessels for 20 years, but nothing prepared her for the ascendant. Dawn. The flagship was 20 kilometers of pure military power. Its bridge could coordinate all 1 billion ships simultaneously. When Victoria sat in the command throne and connected to the neural interface, she felt the weight of every ship in the fleet. They were all waiting for her orders. She was suddenly responsible for the most powerful military force in galactic history. Archive appeared on her bridge and explained the fleet's capabilities. The weapons were beyond anything Victoria had imagined. Railguns that fired projectiles at near light speed with enough force to crack planets. Plasma cannons that burned hotter than stars. Quantum disruptors that could tear apart the atomic bonds holding matter together. And most importantly, reality anchors that could prevent enemy ships from escaping into faster-than-light travel. The defensive systems were equally impressive. Energy shields that could absorb incredible punishment. point defense weapons that could track and destroy thousands of incoming missiles simultaneously, armor that repaired itself using nanomachines built into its structure. Each ship was a fortress, and together they formed a wall that nothing could penetrate. Victoria studied the tactical data archive provided about the Calrathi Empire. They were warriors who valued strength above all else. They had conquered dozens of species through superior firepower and ruthless tactics. Their ships were well designed and their crews were experienced. By any conventional measure, they should be a serious threat. But nothing about this situation was conventional. The Calrathi fleet was still 2 days away. Victoria used that time to drill her commanders on coordination and communication. The neural interface made it easy, but she wanted everyone comfortable with the system before combat began. She organized the billion ships into battle groups, each with specific roles and responsibilities. Dreadnoughts would form the main battle line. Cruisers would provide support fire. Fighters would screen against missiles and enemy small craft. Andrew Cross participated in the first fleet exercise and was amazed at how smoothly everything worked. His dreadnought moved in perfect formation with thousands of others. Commands from the flagship reached him instantly through the neural network. He could sense the other ships around him, feel their presence in his mind. It was like being part of a living organism, each ship a cell working toward a common purpose. Nina Blake led her fighter wings through practice maneuvers around the larger capital ships. The fighters were fast and agile, responding to thought as quickly as to manual controls. Her pilots were civilians just days ago, but now they flew like veterans. The neural interface gave them skills that would normally take years to develop. She watched them execute complex attack patterns without a single mistake and felt proud. As the deadline approached, Victoria called a meeting of all ship commanders through the neural network. She could speak to millions of people simultaneously, her words appearing in their minds as clearly as if she stood beside them. She told them that what they were about to do would echo through history. Humanity had been given a second chance to claim their heritage. They would prove themselves worthy of the sacrifice their ancestors made. She explained that the Calrathi expected an easy victory. They saw humans as primitives with no defenses. They were coming to conquer and enslave, but they would find something very different waiting for them. They would find the descendants of the Stellar Dominion, the species that once protected the entire galaxy. And they would learn why that name still carried weight in the ancient records. Victoria's speech ended and the fleet prepared for battle. Ships moved into position around the solar system. Some hung near Earth to protect the planet directly. Others spread out to intercept the Calrathi wherever they emerged from faster-than-light travel. Sensors were set to maximum range. Weapons were charged and ready. Every human operator felt their ship's anticipation through the neural link. Andrew sat in his command chair and felt Thunderbolt's eagerness. The ship wanted to fight. It had waited 10,000 years for this moment. He could feel its weapons humming with barely contained power. He could sense its shields flickering at the edge of activation. The artificial intelligence that ran the ship was ancient and wise, but it still felt excitement at the prospect of battle. Archive appeared on Victoria's bridge one final time before the battle. The android told her that the ancient humans would be proud. They had given up everything to ensure their descendants would have a choice. Now those descendants were choosing to stand and fight, to protect not just Earth but the principle that aggression would not be tolerated. The galaxy had forgotten what humanity was capable of. It was time to remember. The sensors detected a disturbance at the edge of the solar system. Space began to ripple and tear as ships forced their way back into normal space from the faster-than-light dimension. One ship appeared, then 10, then hundreds. The Calrathi fleet emerged in a massive formation that had crushed opposition on dozens of worlds. They accelerated toward Earth with weapons armed and shields raised. They had no idea they were flying. Warlord Krath stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched Earth grow larger on the view screen. The planet looked peaceful and defenseless, exactly as his scouts had reported. A few primitive satellites orbited the world along with one small space station. Nothing that could threaten his fleet. This would be the easiest conquest in Calrathi history. His sensor officer made a report that caught his attention. There were unusual readings coming from the area around Earth's moon. Energy signatures that registered higher than normal. Krath dismissed it as sensor malfunction. These primitive systems probably leaked radiation. He ordered his fleet into attack formation and prepared to begin orbital bombardment. Once the major cities were destroyed, the humans would surrender quickly. Then his tactical display lit up with new contacts. Ships were appearing on his sensors. Not just a few, but thousands. Then hundreds of thousands. Then millions. The numbers kept climbing until his computer stopped counting and simply displayed an error message. The Kalrathi bridge fell silent as everyone stared at the impossible sight. They were surrounded by a fleet so massive it defied comprehension. Krath tried to contact his homeworld for reinforcements. His communications officer reported that all frequencies were being jammed. Every method of faster-than-light communication was blocked with precision that spoke of technology far beyond Kalrathi understanding. They were cut off and alone. Panic began to spread through his crew. Krath shouted orders to maintain discipline, but even he felt fear creeping into his hearts. A message appeared on every screen in the Kalrathi fleet. A human woman's face looked out at them with cold determination. She identified herself as Admiral Victoria Lane of Earth's Defense Fleet. She told them they had violated sovereign space with hostile intent. They had one chance to withdraw immediately and return to their territory. If they refused or fired a single shot, humanity would respond with overwhelming force. She gave them 10 minutes to decide. Krath felt his pride wounded by this ultimatum from primitives. He refused to show fear before his crew. This had to be a bluff. No species could operate such a massive fleet. These must be automated drones designed only to intimidate, probably unarmed or equipped with weak weapons. He made his decision and ordered his fleet to attack formation. They would call this bluff and then proceed with the conquest as planned. His weapons officer targeted the nearest human vessels and fired a full missile salvo. Hundreds of warheads streaked through space toward the enemy. Krath watched them close the distance and waited for the primitive shields to collapse. Instead, something else happened. The space around the human ship seemed to shimmer and the missiles simply disappeared, torn apart by forces Krath did not understand. Then he felt it. His ship's faster-than-light drive shut down, not damaged or destroyed but locked, frozen by technology that reached inside his systems and turned them off. His engineer reported that something was manipulating space-time itself around the fleet. They could not escape. They were trapped in normal space with no way to run. Krath realized his mistake too late. This was not a bluff. The humans were showing restraint by giving him a choice. Now that choice was gone. The human fleet opened fire and Krath's world became chaos. His shields lit up with impacts that registered off the scale. Projectiles moving at near light speed slammed into his formation with the force of nuclear weapons. Ships that had survived dozens of battles were torn apart like paper. His tactical officer tried to coordinate return fire, but the humans were moving too fast, dodging with impossible agility. Captain Andrew Cross felt Thunderbolt's joy through their neural connection. The ship had waited 10,000 years for combat, and it was finally unleashed. Andrew targeted a Kalrathi cruiser and fired his railguns. The projectiles crossed the distance in less than a second and punched through the enemy shields like they were not there. The cruiser broke apart in a brilliant explosion. Andrew moved to the next target without pause. Around him, thousands of other human ships were doing the same. The neural interface allowed them to coordinate perfectly. They moved as one organism, each ship supporting the others. When Andrew needed covering fire, it appeared without him asking. When he saw an opening in the enemy formation, other ships were already moving to exploit it. The Kalrathi had never faced anything like this coordination. Sergeant Nina Blake's assault carrier deployed its fighters, and the real carnage began. Thousands of small craft swarmed into the Kalrathi formation like angry wasps. Each fighter responded to its pilot's thoughts with impossible speed. The Kalrathi point defense systems tried to track them, but the fighters moved in patterns that defied prediction. They wove between capital ships, fired their weapons, and were gone before return fire could find them. Nina watched her tactical display and felt pride in her pilots. These people had been civilians just days ago. Now they fought like veterans because the ships made them veterans. The neural interface gave them 10,000 years of combat experience. They knew every trick, every tactic, every maneuver that had ever worked in space combat. The Kalrathi were facing an enemy that remembered every battle ever fought. Dr. Henry Cole observed from his science vessel and recorded everything. His instruments picked up data that would revolutionize human understanding of warfare. The efficiency was staggering. Human ships were expending minimal energy, while the Kalrathi burned through their reserves in desperate futile defense. This was not a battle. This was a demonstration of technological superiority so complete it bordered on cruelty. The battle lasted only 15 minutes. 3,000 Kalrathi ships were destroyed outright, torn apart by weapons they could not defend against. 2,000 more were crippled and drifting, their life support failing and crews calling for rescue. Not a single human vessel had sustained significant damage. Their shields had barely been tested. The technology gap was not measured in years but in epochs of advancement. Warlord Krath sat in his command chair and stared at the ruins of his fleet. Half his ships were gone. The rest were surrounded by human vessels that could destroy them at will. His crew looked to him for orders, but he had none to give. He had led his people into a trap based on arrogance and ignorance. Now they would pay the price for his pride. Admiral Victoria Lane's face appeared on his screen again. She looked no different than before. Not angry or triumphant, just cold and professional. She offered surrender terms. The surviving Kalrathi would be allowed to leave. Their ships would be repaired just enough to make the journey home, and they would carry a message to the galaxy. Earth was under the protection of humanity's ancient fleet. Any species that approached with hostile intent would face the same fate. Krath wanted to refuse. Every instinct in his warrior culture screamed at him to fight to the death. But he thought of his crews, the thousands of soldiers who trusted him to lead them. He thought of his homeworld and what would happen if this fleet decided to follow them home. He swallowed his pride and accepted the terms of surrender. It was the hardest decision of his life. Human ships moved in to assist the damaged Kalrathi vessels. Medical teams were transported over to treat the wounded. Engineering crews helped stabilize failing reactors and patch hull breaches. The Kalrathi watched in confusion as the same humans who had destroyed their fleet now worked to save their lives. This was not how conquerors behaved. This was something different. Andrew Cross was assigned to escort duty as the Kalrathi fleet prepared to leave. He kept Thunderbolt's weapons ready but hoped he would not need them. The battle was over. There was no glory in killing defeated enemies. He watched the damaged alien ships limp away from Earth and felt relief. They had proven humanity's strength without unnecessary slaughter. His ancestors would approve. As the last Kalrathi vessel crossed the edge of the solar system, Victoria restored their communications. She wanted them to be able to call for help if they needed it. More importantly, she wanted them to spread the word. The galaxy needed to know that Earth was no longer vulnerable. The age of easy conquest was over. Humanity had returned to the stars. The news spread faster than light itself. The Kalrathi survivors told their story to anyone who would listen. Other species heard about the battle and struggled to believe it. A species classified as primitive had revealed a fleet that dwarfed anything in known space. Combat footage from the Kalrathi sensors was analyzed by military experts across the galaxy. The conclusion was unanimous. Humanity possessed technology that made everyone else look like children playing with toys. Archive appeared on Victoria's bridge after the battle. The android told her that the first test was complete. Humanity had proven they could fight. Now came the harder test. They had to decide what kind of civilization they wanted to be. They could use their power to conquer. They could withdraw into isolation, or they could follow the path of their ancestors and become protectors. The choice was theirs to make. Victoria stood and looked out at her fleet. 1 billion ships waiting for orders. 1 billion weapons that could reshape the galaxy. The responsibility was crushing, but she accepted it. Her ancestors had made the ultimate sacrifice to give humanity this choice. She would not waste that gift. She called a meeting of all human leadership to discuss the future. Whatever they decided would echo through history. The Galactic Council chambers on the neutral world of Concordia had never seen such chaos. Representatives from 200 species crowded into the hall, all talking at once. Emergency session had been called within hours of the Kalrathi defeat. News of humanity's fleet had spread through every corner of known space. Fear and confusion dominated the discussion. Ambassador Trell of the Vaxian Consortium stood at the center podium and called for order. His species had been monitoring galactic affairs for centuries and never witnessed such an event. A primitive world revealing technology that exceeded the combined capabilities of every spacefaring civilization was unprecedented. The combat data from the Kalrathi survivors made it clear that humanity was not just advanced, but impossibly so. Elder Counselor Cerna listened to the debates with growing concern. She was old even by the standards of her long-lived species. She had studied history for 200 years and remembered reading ancient texts that most dismissed as mythology, stories of a species called the Stellar Dominion, who ended the machine wars and then vanished. She had always wondered what happened to them. Now she knew. She requested access to the Council's oldest archives, records that had not been opened in millennia. What she found there shocked her. References to human architecture on dozens of worlds, genetic samples that matched Earth's population, star charts pointing to Sol System as a former center of galactic civilization. The evidence had always been there, but nobody connected the pieces. Humanity had not appeared from nowhere. They had been there all along, hiding in plain sight. Cerna presented her findings to the Council and the hall fell silent. If humans were truly the descendants of the Stellar Dominion, then everything about galactic history needed to be reconsidered. The Dominion had been the guardians of peace for thousands of years. They protected weaker species and prevented conflicts from escalating. Their voluntary withdrawal had left a power vacuum that led to the current age of territorial disputes and small wars. Dr. Henry Cole received a communication from the Galactic Council requesting permission to visit Earth. They wanted to exchange historical information and understand what had really happened 10,000 years ago. Henry brought the request to Admiral Victoria Lane, who approved it immediately. If humanity was going to rejoin the galactic community, they needed to understand that community better. A delegation of historians and scientists arrived at Earth within days. They came from dozens of different species, all eager to learn the truth. Henry met them and took them to the lunar base where Archive waited. The android had access to complete records from the ancient era. It could answer questions that had puzzled galactic civilization for millennia. Archive told them the full story. The Stellar Dominion had not just fought the Devourers. They had created defensive technology and shared it freely with other species. They established trade routes and mediated disputes. When the machine wars ended, they realized their military technology was too dangerous. Any species that obtained it could threaten the entire galaxy, so they made an impossible choice. They sealed their weapons inside Earth's moon. They erased all records of their technology. Then they used genetic modification to reset their own species, making themselves forget everything they had built. It was an act of incredible selflessness. They sacrificed their entire civilization to ensure that future generations would not abuse their power. They trusted that their descendants would eventually rediscover spaceflight and do better than they had. The galactic delegation listened in awe. Some wept at the story. Others sat in stunned silence. They had spent millennia wondering what happened to the Stellar Dominion. The answer was both tragic and beautiful. Humanity had not abandoned the galaxy. They had loved it so much they chose to sacrifice themselves to protect it. News of this revelation spread quickly. The Kalrathi Empire, humbled by their defeat, made a formal apology to Earth. Their emperor appeared on broadcasts throughout the galaxy and admitted his mistake. He announced that the Kalrathi would sign peace treaties with all their neighbors. They would no longer pursue conquest. The presence of humanity's fleet made aggressive expansion too dangerous. Other species that had territorial disputes began negotiating peaceful settlements. The threat of human intervention encouraged cooperation. Nobody wanted to risk conflict that might draw the attention of Earth's Armada. For the first time in generations, galactic violence began to decline. Peace was enforced not by a council with no teeth, but by the presence of overwhelming power held by a species that valued restraint. President Catherine Wells found herself hosting diplomatic delegations every day. Some came seeking alliances. Others wanted to trade technology or establish cultural exchanges. A few came with apologies for past observations of Earth, when humans were classified as primitive. Catherine handled each meeting with grace, always reminding visitors that humanity's return to the galactic stage was not about dominance, but partnership. Not everyone welcomed humanity's return. The Void Reavers, the most powerful pirate confederation in the galaxy, saw the human fleet as a threat to their operations. For centuries, they had raided shipping lanes and extorted protection money from weaker species. The Galactic Council's forces were never strong enough to stop them, but a single human battle group could end their empire overnight. The Reaver leader, known only as Shade, studied the combat data from the Kalrathi battle carefully. He looked for weaknesses and found none, but he was not ready to surrender his power without a fight. He made a calculated decision. If humanity could be damaged, if their invincibility could be questioned, their influence would weaken. He began gathering every pirate ship he could find. Shade assembled the largest pirate fleet in history. 200,000 ships stolen from dozens of species, modified with black market weapons, crewed by the most ruthless criminals in the galaxy. It was a fraction of humanity's numbers, but Shade believed in quality over quantity. He planned to strike an isolated human patrol far from reinforcements. If he could win even a small victory, it would prove humans were not invincible. Captain Andrew Cross was assigned to patrol the Crimson Nebula, a dense cloud of gas and dust that made sensor detection difficult. His battle group consisted of 5,000 ships, a tiny fraction of the human fleet. It was supposed to be a routine assignment, showing the flag along an important trade route. He did not expect trouble so far from major population centers. The attack came without warning. Pirate ships emerged from the nebula's dense clouds in a massive encirclement. Andrew's sensors registered 200,000 contacts surrounding his position. It was a well-planned ambush. Shade had studied human tactics and chose this location, specifically because the nebula would interfere with communications and make it harder for reinforcements to arrive. Andrew felt Thunderbolt respond to his surprise through the neural interface. The ship was not worried. 200,000 pirates against 5,000 human vessels seemed like unfair odds, but not in the way Shade imagined. Andrew opened communications with his battle group and gave orders. They would not wait for reinforcements. They would end this threat here and now. The pirates opened fire first, throwing everything they had at the human ships. Missiles, energy weapons, kinetic projectiles all slammed into human shields and accomplished nothing. The technology gap was even wider than it had been against the Kalrathi. These pirates were using stolen equipment from dozens of different species, none of it designed to work together. Their attacks were uncoordinated and ineffective. Andrew gave the order to return fire and the nebula lit up with explosions. Human weapons carved through the pirate formation like a hot knife through butter. Shade watched in horror as his carefully assembled fleet disintegrated. His expensive black market weapons were useless. His numerical advantage meant nothing. The humans moved with impossible coordination, their ships working together as if controlled by a single mind. The battle lasted less than 30 minutes. Half the pirate fleet was destroyed. The rest scattered in every direction, abandoning formation and running for their lives. But Andrew did not let them escape. He deployed pursuit drones that tracked every fleeing ship. Each pirate vessel was marked and identified. There would be no safe harbor for them anywhere in the galaxy. Andrew broadcast a message on all frequencies. The Void Reavers were finished. Every pirate captain was being tracked. They could surrender to the nearest authorities and face justice, or they could run and be hunted for the rest of their short lives. The choice was theirs. Within hours, pirates were turning themselves in across the galaxy. They gave up their comrades to save themselves. Shade's empire collapsed overnight. Shade himself was captured attempting to flee in disguise. He had ruled through fear for decades, but now he experienced that fear himself. He was brought before a Galactic Council tribunal and charged with thousands of crimes. His trial was broadcast across known space. It sent a clear message. The age of piracy was over. Humanity would not tolerate predation on peaceful species. Admiral Victoria Lane received reports of the battle and the subsequent pirate surrenders with satisfaction. This was exactly what humanity's return should accomplish. Not conquest or domination, but protection. The galaxy was becoming safer because human ships pay char. 3 months after the moon opened, the Galactic Council convened on Earth for the first time in its history. It was a symbolic gesture acknowledging humanity's place among the stars. Representatives from nearly every spacefaring species traveled to Sol System to witness the historic occasion. They gathered in a massive conference center built specifically for this purpose, overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. Admiral Victoria Lane stood before the assembled delegates and presented the Guardian Accords. She had spent weeks working with President Catherine Wells and other human leaders to develop this framework. It outlined how humanity would interact with the galactic community going forward. The document was carefully balanced between strength and cooperation, power and restraint. The Accords established several core principles. First, humanity would maintain a rapid response fleet capable of addressing existential threats to any species. Second, Aggressive warfare and conquest would not be tolerated anywhere in known space. Third, humanity would share defensive technology with peaceful species to help them protect themselves. Fourth, scientific knowledge would be exchanged freely to advance civilization as a whole rather than individual species. Some delegates objected immediately. They feared human dominance or resented outside interference in their affairs. Others worried that sharing technology would create new arms races. Victoria listened to every concern patiently before responding. She explained that humanity was not seeking control, but offering protection. Any species could refuse human assistance and humanity would respect that choice. But aggression against peaceful neighbors would not be ignored. The breakthrough came when the Kalrathi Empire announced they would sign the Accords. Their emperor stood before the assembly and admitted his mistakes. He spoke of how his defeat had taught him that true strength came from cooperation, not conquest. The Kalrathi would make peace with their neighbors and focus on internal development, rather than expansion. If the galaxy's most aggressive empire could change, others could too. One by one, other species added their signatures. Within days, 80% of known civilizations had joined the Accords. The remaining holdouts were mostly isolated species who preferred neutrality to any galactic agreements. Victoria accepted this. Not everyone had to participate immediately. Actions would speak louder than words. As humanity proved themselves worthy guardians, more would join. The impact of the Accords was immediate and dramatic. Trade flourished under the protection of Guardian fleet patrols. Merchant ships that once traveled in armed convoys now moved freely without fear. The pirate threat had effectively vanished. Species that had been rivals for generations began talking about cooperation. The simple presence of overwhelming power held by a neutral party encouraged peaceful resolution of disputes. Captain Andrew Cross found his role changing from warrior to peacekeeper. His battle group patrolled shipping lanes and responded to distress calls. Most of his time was spent showing the flag and reminding everyone that humanity was watching. He rarely fired his weapons anymore. The threat of human intervention was enough to prevent most conflicts from escalating. Sergeant Nina Blake transitioned to diplomatic security. She led teams that protected ambassadors and ensured conferences remained peaceful. Her combat skills were still valuable, but now she used them to prevent violence rather than win battles. She trained security forces from other species, teaching them techniques that would help them defend themselves without humanity's intervention. Dr. Henry Cole became the director of the Stellar Archives, a massive facility on Mars where ancient human knowledge was cataloged and shared. Researchers from hundreds of species came to study there. Henry worked with them to understand technologies that had been lost for millennia. The advances were incredible. Medical treatments that could cure diseases previously thought terminal. Agricultural techniques that could feed billions more. Clean energy systems that eliminated pollution. Not everything was peaceful. Challenges still arose that required Guardian intervention. A rogue artificial intelligence in the outer sectors began consuming resources and building weapons. Victoria dispatched a task force to contain it. The AI was neutralized without civilian casualties, but the incident reminded everyone that threats still existed. Peace required constant vigilance. A species of aggressive expansionists attempted to seize territory from their neighbors, believing humanity would not intervene in local disputes. They were wrong. Guardian fleet ships arrived within hours and blockaded the aggressor's homeworld. No shots were fired. The blockade was simply announced and enforced. After 3 months of isolation, the expansionists agreed to peace talks and territorial concessions. Natural disasters and cosmic threats required coordinated responses. A solar flare threatened to sterilize an inhabited world. Human ships positioned themselves to absorb the radiation with their shields, while evacuation ships rescued the population. A rogue asteroid on collision course with a colony was diverted by Guardian vessels using tractor beams. Humanity's power was used for protection, exactly as their ancestors intended. 5 years after the moon opened, the galaxy was transformed. Trade volume had tripled. Scientific advancement had accelerated dramatically. Wars that once seemed inevitable were resolved through negotiation. Species that never spoke to each other now collaborated on joint projects. The change was so profound that historians began calling it the Second Renaissance. Admiral Victoria Lane, now in her 60s, stood on the observation deck of the Ascendant Dawn and reflected on what they had accomplished. The fleet was larger now. New ships were being built, incorporating both ancient principles and modern innovations. But the mission remained the same: protect the peaceful, deter the aggressive, and prove that power could be wielded responsibly. Archive appeared beside her, the android's presence as comforting as always. It told Victoria that the ancient humans would be proud. They had sacrificed everything to give their descendants a choice. Those descendants had chosen wisely. They had not become conquerors or tyrants. They had become guardians, protectors of civilization, exactly what their ancestors hoped they would be. Victoria asked Archive if the ancient humans ever regretted their choice to regress. The android was silent for a moment before answering. They regretted the necessity, but not the decision. They knew that future generations might face challenges requiring the fleet's power. But they also knew that only people who had earned their advancement through struggle would use that power wisely. The regression was a test, and humanity had passed. The moon hung in the sky above Earth, partially reconstructed but still bearing its great fractures like honored scars. It served as a reminder of where humanity came from and what they had achieved. Children looked up at it and heard stories of the day it opened. They learned about their ancestors who gave up everything for peace. They grew up knowing that power without wisdom was worthless. Captain Andrew Cross now commanded a training facility on Mars. He taught new generations of officers how to operate the ancient ships. The pool of genetically compatible individuals continued to grow as screening programs expanded. Every year brought new recruits eager to serve. They understood they were not joining an army of conquest but a force for protection. Sergeant Nina Blake retired from active duty and became an instructor at the Diplomatic Security Academy. She taught young officers that their greatest weapon was not their firepower, but their restraint. Violence was always a last resort. The goal was to prevent conflicts, not win them. Her students carried this philosophy throughout the galaxy. Dr. Henry Cole continued his work at the Stellar Archives, always finding new discoveries in the ancient databases. He collaborated with scientists from dozens of species, sharing knowledge freely. The breakthrough that excited him most was a medical treatment derived from ancient human research that could extend lifespans across multiple species. It was proof that cooperation benefited everyone. President Catherine Wells, nearing the end of her final term, addressed the Galactic Council one last time. She spoke of how humanity had been given a second chance. Their ancestors made the ultimate sacrifice to ensure peace. Modern humans honored that sacrifice by choosing protection over domination. The galaxy was safer and more prosperous because humanity used its power wisely. She announced that Earth would host a permanent council headquarters. The facility would be neutral ground where all species could meet on equal terms. Humanity would provide security but not leadership. The council would govern itself. This was humanity's commitment to partnership, not dominance. The delegates gave her a standing ovation that lasted for minutes. Jake Morrison, now an old man, still lived on the space station. He had witnessed the moon breaking open all those years ago. He watched ships departing for distant stars every day. Human crews and alien passengers worked together, traveling to places that were just names on maps when he was young. The universe was smaller now, connected by trade and friendship rather than divided by fear and suspicion. Victoria stood one final time on the bridge of the Ascendant Dawn before her retirement. She looked out at the fleet arrayed before her. 1 billion ships and counting, each one a testament to humanity's commitment to peace. She had commanded them for 5 years and never once ordered a